Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited, John Haynes, A Conversation with Death. The man who rules the world and the angel of darkness take on a horde of demons in this inaugural John Haynes series adventure. Get John Haynes, A Conversation with Death for 99 cents on Kindle or in paperback today. I was watching a Diversity in Comics video, and he was talking about an article where Sana Amana, the Vice President of Content and Character Development, made the statement that Marvel isn't a boy brand anymore. And with the statement that Marvel is not a boy brand anymore, she has set Marvel down the course towards going out of business. Now, when it comes down to Marvel Comics is a boy brand for a reason. And that reason, since its inception in the 1930s, has to do with the way boys learn and the way boys process information. And when it comes down to boys and girls process information very differently, especially in their early years of development. And I learned this from a family member who took a course in Columbia in early childhood and early childhood development. And I learned that also by reading about early childhood and early childhood development. And when it comes down to boys learn from being visual because boys primarily are visual creatures. They go by what they see. And what attracts boys to comic books and superheroes is the fact that your superheroes are dressed in these brightly colored costumes and they're in these action-packed adventures. And the comic book is attractive to boys because it plays to the strengths of a boy's ability to read. That's why so many boys learn how to read using comic books, because comic books, one, have these pictures which draw or attract the boy to the book and want them to pick it up. And picking it up is part of also how they learn how to read as well, because boys learn through hands-on learning. That means they learn how to do things primarily with their hands. And in order to read a comic book, a boy has to pick it up, they have to pick up it and turn the pages, and in order to watch the action progress, they have to keep turning the pages. And in order to learn what is going on in the story, they have to keep turning the pages. That's the core reason why comic books became so popular in the 1930s, and one of the core reasons why comic books replaced pulp fiction. Because before comic books came to the marketplace in the 1930s, we had pulp fiction. And in pulp fiction, we had characters like Doc Savage and the Shadow and the Avenger who participated in these action-packed adventures. And while they were very entertaining to young boys in the early 30s, many boys once they saw the comic book, they had less reason to read them because the comic book played more to their strengths. Because the pulp fiction, you had one or two pictures which gave you an idea, but the comic book gave you multiple pictures of action going on as related to the story. Whereas pulp fiction, you had the picture which showed you the character in action, and then you had to read chapters in prose. And that, while it played somewhat to the strengths of boys, comic books really played strongly to the strengths of boys' reading skills, and it encouraged boys to go out here and learn how to read, because this comic book was something that they could grab off a shelf, and then they could look at the pictures and watch the action go on. And then as they wanted to see the action progress, they had to continue turning pages, and they had to read with their hands and with their eyes. And that's how a lot of boys learned how to read. That's how I learned how to read at 4 years old. And that's what encouraged a lot of boys to learn how to read on the regular. And it's why so many boys relate to comic book characters and identify with the experiences of comic book characters. Now, girls, on the other hand, they learn how to read very differently. Now, girls, they tend to process information inside of their heads. And when they read, usually they read by using their imaginations. This is why girls are attracted to books like your middle grade fiction, such as your Harry Potters, your Twilights, and many other fiction books, like in the 1930s and 1940s, like your Hardy Boys and your Nancy Drew, because those stories enabled the girl to imagine what she thought the characters looked like, and she could come up with her own ideas about what these characters are supposed to be. That all relates to the way girls process information, because girls want to have their own idea of what a character looks like, whereas boys, they want that picture of the character, and they want to be able to go with that picture of the character. And that's why comic books have primarily been a boy-related product. Now, yes, there have been comics that have been aimed at women, such as romance comics and other types of heroines. However, those books oftentimes don't sell as well in the marketplace, because when it comes down to women, they primarily are not visual creatures, and they are more drawn to books where they can come up with their own ideas. This is why women primarily are attracted to, after they go and finish reading middle grade young adult fiction, they graduate to women's fiction or romance novels, because the stories are related to their experiences, one, and two, it is related to the way they process information. Now, your son Amanat really does not understand this, because she is grossly unqualified for the position she has, and that's because she just does not understand that comic books are a part of a child's development, and that you really need someone who understands the publishing world, and understands the role comic books play in children's early childhood and childhood development. And that's why comic books were so popular with kids, because it was a visual medium. It enabled boys to be able to read playing to their strengths, and your comic book was something that enabled boys to continue reading stories and gave them incentive to read stories. But today we don't see that, because we have your people like your son Amanat talking about comic books are no longer something for boys. And if comic books are not for boys, then the industry is in trouble, because the core customer for comic books has been boys, again, since the 1930s, for a reason. And that reason, again, relates to the way boys process information. Because boys do everything from a visual perspective, that's why they go out here and buy comics. And the other reason why they go out here and buy comics and have a motivation to keep buying comics is because comic books feature stories that relate to their life experiences and the experiences they can expect to grow up seeing when they become a man. That's another important component to comic books, is understanding that this comic book is giving a boy some models for manhood. It is also giving him life lessons for manhood, because like Peter Parker learning that lesson about great power and great responsibility, or your Bruce Wayne learning how to go on and survive in the world as a man, or your Clark Kent learning to stand for truth, justice, and the American way, your comic book with featuring superheroes gives boys examples and models of manhood, and these models and examples for manhood give him something to aspire to grow up to. Now, some people want to give girls those type of heroes. However, when it comes down to the comic book medium, it's a challenge to give girls those types of heroes, because again, girls just don't read comic books in large numbers. Usually the core audience for comic books, again, is male, because it relates to the way boys process information and girls process information differently. If you really wanted to do superheroes for girls, one of the big challenges is trying to get them interested in reading a medium that they have no interest in trying to process the information in. Because when it comes down to girls, again, they want to imagine what the character looks like. They want to come up with their own idea of what the character looks like. And that's what makes it a challenge to sell books like your Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel, or your Captain Marvel to a woman, because women want to have their own ideas about a character. Moreover, they want to see a certain type of story paradigm. And when I look at a book like a Captain Marvel or a Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel, I don't see what plays to female strengths in those books. When I look at those books, I don't see what I put in ISIS or Easteen books, which are popular with women and young girls, because I focus on things like relationships, I focus on things like social interactions, and I also focus on things as related to things that women do today, like social media and being social, in addition to having the heroines taking on bad guys. So there are other elements as related that to things that are strong to women, but you don't see that in many of these heroines that they have at Marvel Comics, and that's why those heroines just don't sell, because the stories don't feature paradigms that are relatable to women, and they don't feature story aspects that are related to a woman's experience. When it comes down to women, they want to see certain things in a story, certain things that they can relate to, certain things they can identify with, and certain experiences that they know to be true to their own experiences. And they don't see that in your books, again, like your Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel, your Unstoppable Wasp, your Captain Marvel. These women aren't like any woman most women know, and that's why many female comic fans have not warmed to those characters or have been attracted to those characters, because what they're seeing in that experience is not their experience, and many guys don't see a woman that they want to have any relationship with. And this is one of the core reasons why these books don't sell. In order to create a heroine that sells, you have to create a character that people can see as likable, someone who is relatable, and someone who has experiences like your experience. And they also have to see someone that they want to be friends with. Now, when it comes down to me, and when I create heroines like an Isis or an Easteen or a Matilda Crowley, I oftentimes think of either a girl I would like to date, or a girl I would like to marry, or a girl who women would want to be friends with. And when I take a critical look after reading Captain Marvels and Ms. Marvels and even this Unstoppable Wasp, I don't see any sort of thing that is relatable or someone I would want to spend time with. And that's really sad, because as a writer, I've learned how to make characters who are completely mean-spirited bad girls, like I did with Nikki Desmond in All About Nikki, but that character still was so popular that she became an international hit. And the reason why that character became an international hit, while she was still a rich, spoiled, rotten brat, was because she still had some likable traits, and she still had some traits you could relate to and identify with. And that character was very popular and an international best-selling character for me when I first started ESJS Direct Imprint. What I'm seeing at Marvel is you have Sana Amanat trying to sell a boy product to girls, and then trying to get girls into comics featuring characters that just aren't relatable to girls. She really wants to create this heroine and try to sell this product to girls and make comics gender neutral. However, the medium is gender specific for a reason. Again, it relates to the way boys and girls process information. And while some girls do read comic books, they have no incentive to read these comic books because they just don't feature the experiences that girls have, nor do they feature a heroine that is someone they can relate to or identify with. One of the reasons why I call Isis the goddess next door is because I focus on the concept of a girl next door, and the girl next door is an all-American thing about a woman being a friend, a woman being a neighbor, a woman helping out in her community. And we don't see that with your Kamala Khan, and we don't see that with your Captain Marvel, nor do we see that with your Unstoppable Wasp. No, we see these characters and they are detached from people, they are disconnected from people, and yes, while they have friends, their friends really aren't people we want to be friends with. When I create characters, I try to make I try to use the girl next door as part of the foundation, and I try to give you someone that you want to be friends with, someone you want to spend time with, because that's very important for the development of a heroine. We want to spend time with this woman. We want to spend our money on reading her adventures, and we need to have incentive to do that. And the way you have incentive to do that is to make this character as friendly and approachable as possible, and make this character so attractive that guys are thinking about wanting to have this woman as a girlfriend, or have character traits that make her like a girlfriend or a wife, somebody you want to spend your time with and want to learn more about. That's very important when you're writing heroines, but many of Marvel's creators, they just don't understand this. Many of the writers and artists there, they don't understand these traits, and they think they can try to shoehorn this type of heroine that they're making into the comic book medium and try to sell it to girls. But again, selling to girls is completely different than selling to boys, and it's a major challenge when you're trying to do it in a visual medium like comic books. Yes, there are girls who do read comics, however, they don't have an incentive to read most of these modern Marvel comics because of the way they are written, the way they are designed, and the way they play to the weaknesses of women, which is trying to sell them a character in a visual medium and then selling them a character with traits they don't relate to. Again, comics are primarily boy related because boys process information primarily through images and visual pictures, and girls, they want to imagine what characters look like. So you're not going to make comics gender neutral because comics have been gender specific since their inception when Marvel Comics was established back in the 1930s. And any sort of person who works in comics, they really need to understand the history of the comic book, the history of the comic book medium, and the history of how it works. Because those of us who do study the comic book medium, like I have for the last 30 years, we understand why things are the way they are and why those things aren't going to change. And any attempt to change them will just lead to a publisher like a Marvel going right out of business. Because if you don't create products for your core audience of customers, you're not going to have any customers overall, because those customers aren't going to go out here and buy those books on the regular. And while it's nice to say you want to go out here and promote diversity, you have to understand your core customer base, and you have to understand what appeals to your customer before you go out here and create products for it. As someone who has worked in trade publishing and has owned his own publishing imprint, I understand who my core customer base is. I understand what customer I'm trying to sell to, and I understand how to create products for customers like tweens and teens and young adults. And I also know how to create products for older adults as well. And I understand that when you're creating something like fantasy or science fiction, you have to know what your customer is looking for. And when I look at what the direction Sana Amanat is taking Marvel in, she's taking Marvel in a direction that is going to damage the Marvel brand, because if you alienate boys in the hopes of getting to a girl audience that just does not primarily exist, because it's only a small minority of women who buy comics on the regular, you're going to wind up alienating a core customer base that primarily gives you your profits. It's just like a company like a Harlequin going out here and saying they're going to walk away from their core audience of women to go out here to get an audience of men. And that would be ridiculous, because men don't usually read romance novels. Some men may read romance novels, but you wouldn't want to alienate your core customer base who has been buying romance novels on the regular to get at a male audience that primarily buys nonfiction, historical fiction, fantasy fiction, and science fiction. It would be ridiculous for that publisher to do that, because it would cost that company much of its profits, and any smart publisher who, or editor-in-chief, who was to see that direction, they would want to change course, because they wouldn't want to get fired. And what's sad here is that we have this grossly unqualified woman taking Marvel in a bad direction, and no one at corporate Disney like Bob Iger is coming in to step in and terminate this woman and let her know, look, this product is not meant to be this way. It's meant to be for this audience for a reason, and your attempt to take it in this direction is costing us money. That's what I really would like to see, because when I look at the sad state of Marvel and her talking about Marvel not being a boy brand anymore, that's not something that's going to help the bottom line as related to Marvel, nor is it going to help the bottom line as related to Disney. If you'd like to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box. And if you want to try some of my SJS Direct publications like the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, The Temptation of John Haynes, and the Sinisterella trilogy, you may do so by clicking the link to Amazon.com in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.